Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today I want to talk about how the Nintendo Switch 2 may be coming out even sooner than you think. So initially today I was looking at some different potential leaks for both the pricing and release timing of the Switch 2. And looking it over, there are some things that I am skeptical of, but after doing some research and checking into some things, I actually think I have a better idea of what the pricing will be, and an even better idea of what the release timing will be for Switch 2, and it's even sooner than what some of these leaks are suggesting here, and I'm pretty excited to get into all of this today. But before going forward, let me take this moment to point out that I am aiming to reach 50,000 subscribers by the time the Switch 2 comes out. So if you do find yourself enjoying my content, I would appreciate it if you could subscribe and hit that notification bell. So like I just said in my introduction, I feel like I figured out when the Switch 2 may actually be coming out, and it's sooner than what some of these leaks are suggesting, but first let's get into what some of these leaks are suggesting. So firstly, there's a few different venues that are coming out with what may be the pricing for the Switch 2. So taking a look at Twitter here, Switch 2 stock shared this image of Best Buy apparently listing the Nintendo Switch 2 for $349.99 USD, $350. Now, when you take a look at this thread and you scroll down, someone makes the argument that maybe this is just them putting a listing for the OLED, and because it says Switch 2, it also mentions the $350 price point. And that may be the case. Now, something else to consider is that when it comes to Best Buy or any sort of retailer, oftentimes they may put up a game listing or a pricing in anticipation for what will actually be announced, not necessarily based on any insider information. Sometimes they are accurate and maybe it could be based off something, but also many times, if not most of the time, it's just based off speculation. Essentially, a placeholder. But also apparently, another retailer based in Italy, gamesandmovies.it, is listing the Switch at $364.99, which converts roughly to $379.77 USD. And as this article suggests, that may mean that in America, the Switch 2 could be priced at $350, but they also suggest $400 as a price point as well. So my takeaway from seeing these different retailers putting up different pricings for the Switch 2, while none of this is confirmation, I do wonder if $350 is a reasonable price for the Switch 2. Because the current official pricing for the Switch 1 OLED is $350. And if the Switch 2 is coming out later this year, and by the way, I think it is coming out probably sooner than a lot of you are thinking, we're in January and Switch OLED's still at $350. I don't see how Switch 2 could come out and be sold at $350. Even if Switch 2 is at $400, with the OLED being priced at $350, something has got to give. So my personal expectation is that we are going to see a price drop for the Switch 1 relatively soon, at least by $50, if not more. Here's something a little interesting. The Switch 1 in America was priced at $300, still is, the OG Switch is, and it launched back in March of 2017. If you account for inflation, $300 American dollars back then, now, is $388.36 as of December 2024. So, basically, $300 in 2017 is almost $400 now, and we've been trending upwards in terms of inflation, so by the time the Switch 2 comes out, let's say, I don't know, May or June later this year, we will be just a little bit even closer to actually it being $400. So if I were to make a prediction, I would say Nintendo is going to be shooting for $400 here at the minimum, potentially more, which I hope it's not more. I hope that they just stick to the $400. And I think it's important that they hit this mark, because if $400 is essentially equivalent to $300 back in 2017, then that may be the ideal price point for Nintendo if they are trying to emulate the success for the Nintendo Switch 1, which is probably going to go down as Nintendo's most successful console. The Switch is well on its way to catching up to the Nintendo DS and the PS2 in terms of overall lifetime sales, I think there's a very high likelihood it will go down as the best-selling console of all time across all companies. And from a software perspective, the attach rates are insane. So Nintendo has seen extreme success with the Switch. It's something that it seems like they can replicate, which is likely why they are calling the Switch 2, literally that. So they want to do their very best to replicate the success here. And that may mean coming out with a similar price point, at least comparatively, which leads me to think that $400 is probably the sweet spot. So regardless of what leaks are suggesting here, when we account for inflation and we account for what Nintendo is trying to do with the Switch 2, emulating the Switch 1, but in this current era, $400 is probably the safest bet, but of course, if there are other things going on, maybe it will be a little bit higher. Some people suggest that tariffs could become involved, and maybe we'll be looking at a price of $450. Of course, Nintendo might try and leverage that with some sort of game bundles. That would be nice. If Nintendo is in a position where they have to price the Switch to more than $400 USD, if they were to pack in a game, say like maybe Mario Kart, that could help to lessen the bite quite a bit. But now let's talk about when the Switch 2 is coming out. So apparently Nacon expects the Switch 2 will be launching the first half of its fiscal year, which runs from April to September of 2025. That is quite a large window. But I actually think we have a much better understanding of where the Switch 2 is going to come out, and I've been thinking late May to June, but more recently I think I've come to a more specific timing, like the actual day the Switch 2 will be coming out. And shout out to Botox Games, a friend of mine. I was talking about this subject with him before recording this video. He helped me to come to this conclusion, so his channel will be linked in the description below as well. And he also talks about a lot of these things, so if you're into Nintendo speculation, definitely check out his channel. But when you take a look at the Nintendo Switch 2 experience dates, they start April, a couple days after the big Switch 2 Direct is happening on April 2nd, and they run throughout April until May, and then there's an interesting gap. Mid-May, the events stop, and then they come back at the end of May in Asia. But let's now take a look at the Switch 1 events that were the comparison back in 2017. So Nintendo had its pre-release tour, and as you see here with these different dates, the last ones were in LA on March 3rd through the 5th. The Nintendo Switch launched on March 3rd, 2017. So assuming all things are basically equal, when we look at the equivalent in this day and time for the Switch 2 experience events, they end on June 1st, so you might interpret that to mean, okay, maybe the Switch 2 will come out in early June, but there is this interesting gap in May. Why is there such a large gap here? Well, something else that should be considered is that Nintendo now has a wider reach than they did back in 2017. They do a better job of selling their games and advertising their games in different parts of the world, so Nintendo pushes more events around the world, and likely, even after the Switch 2 comes out, they are going to want to have events in other parts, especially if they can't release the Switch 2 everywhere, literally everywhere at the same time. Let's remind ourselves that Nintendo didn't start putting out the Switch in China until a few years into the generation. So they may not be able to launch the Switch 2 day and date literally everywhere in the world. There may be some other places where there may be some need to have events in a lead up to a second launch or another launch in other regions, such as in Asia, which may explain for this gap of time in events. But here's something else that I think is interesting to consider. On October 20th, 2016, we got the initial reveal for the Switch 1, and then the big Switch 1 presentation happened on January 13th, 2017. The gap in time between those two events, 85 days. And so let's look at an interesting comparison here. We got the Switch 2 reveal on January 16th, 2025, and they announced the big Switch 2 presentation for April 2nd, 2025. The gap in those days is 76. So what I find interesting about this is that a lot of people like to assume that the Switch 2 is going to come out closer to the holidays, but when we take a look at how Nintendo handled the reveal to release window for Switch 1, it was about 4.5 months. It was a pretty quick turnaround. And now we're seeing that for Switch 2, at least in terms of the reveal to big presentation, the turnaround is actually shorter. It was 85 days from reveal to big presentation for Switch 1, and it's 76 days for Switch 2. And so I actually think we may be pacing for an even quicker turnaround than 4.5 months here. So to be exact, the window of time between the reveal for Switch 1 and the release for Switch 1 was 134 days. Which if you assume a month is 30 days, 30 times 4 is 120 days, that's 4 months, plus 14 days, about 2 weeks, that's 4 months and 2 weeks, about 4 months and a half, or as I say here, 4 months and 11 days. Obviously they calculated months a little bit differently, but you get my point. It is about 4.5 months, but it is also exactly 134 days. So if you take 76 divided by 85, what we get here is 0.894. So basically, the gap of time between reveal and big presentation this time is just about 89% compared to the wait we had back for Switch 1. So if we apply that to the amount of days we have to wait from reveal to release for Switch 1, 134 times 0.894, we get 119.796. You round that up, that would place us at 120 days. And then 120 days after January 16th places us close to May 15th. Technically it would be May 16th, but Nintendo launches things on Thursdays now, not Fridays as they used to. And so I think we might actually be looking at a release date for the Switch 2 on May 15th. And so now let's go back to when we're seeing this gap in time for the big Switch 2 experience events. They end on May 10th to the 11th, the weekend before the Switch 2 would come out, if I am correct about this 15th date. It would explain why we've seen this gap in time, and it also lines up with how Nintendo handled Switch 1 with the events ending, with the preview events ending around the launch of the console. And here's another interesting little fact. Doom Dark Ages is coming out on May 15th, a Thursday. And we all know that Microsoft supports Nintendo already. They've been putting out games on the Nintendo Switch. But following the reveal for the Switch 2, Phil Spencer says that Microsoft is really looking forward to supporting Nintendo with Xbox games. So we already have official word that Microsoft plans on supporting Nintendo, not to mention a variety of rumors suggesting a variety of different big Xbox games coming to the Switch 2, and the Doom games also came out on Switch 1. And what's weird about Doom Dark Ages coming out on May 15th, which is when I think the Switch 2 may be coming out, is that Thursdays are a rare release time for Microsoft published titles. Most of the time, especially in recent history, their games come out on Tuesdays. There are some exceptions, sometimes they come out on Wednesdays or Fridays, and even very rarely, if you go back far enough, they come out on Thursdays. But it is a rarity. Most of the time, a big majority, it is Tuesdays. Looking at all the releases over the last few months, they've been happening on Tuesdays. This Doom game coming out on a Thursday is kind of weird. But if my speculation is right here, the Switch 2 would be launching on May 15th, and Doom Dark Ages, as widely speculated by many, could be a launch title for the console, and it's coming out actually literally the day the Switch 2 may be releasing. And while May 15th may seem a little early, when we think about the reveal to release for Switch 1, it's only a little bit less, and over the last few years, Nintendo has been trending towards an even shorter reveal to release window. And as I've already mentioned, the Switch 2 experience events have an interesting gap in time in the middle of May. Not to mention, if we're talking about Switch 2 coming out in June, there are a whole bunch of events happening in June, like Summer Games Fest, and typically Nintendo has their own big direct during that time. So it might make a lot more sense to launch the Switch 2 before June, where there are all these big announcements coming out from different companies in the industry. So really, I'm just left thinking that May 15th is probably our date. But what do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.